never saw him as a gangster, no.
You saw him as?
I saw him as someone who inherited this thing. You start to find it's dubious because you don't know whether somebody wants you because they see you in the...
Jack Nicholson has always been more than just a movie star. With his sharp grin, unpredictable energy, and unforgettable roles in films like The Shining and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he became a symbol of Hollywood excess, charming, brilliant, and dangerous all at once. But while the public saw the legend, Anjelica Huston saw the man behind the myth. Their relationship lasted nearly 2 decades, stretching across some of the most glamorous and chaotic years in Hollywood history. Together, they graced red carpets, partied with the elite, and built a love story that seemed untouchable from the outside. But behind closed doors, things weren't nearly as perfect. Nicholson's notorious womanizing, his unpredictable lifestyle, and the emotional toll of constant betrayal made their romance as destructive as it was intoxicating. For years, Huston kept much of that truth to herself. She offered hints in interviews and memoirs, but she never fully opened up about what it meant to love and lose Jack Nicholson. That is until now. At 74, Anjelica Huston has finally revealed the truth about her time with Nicholson, the passion, the heartbreak, and the scars that never fully healed. The year was the early 1970s, and Hollywood was in the middle of a cultural shift. The studio system had collapsed, a new wave of directors was redefining cinema, and young stars were rising to meet the moment. Among them was Jack Nicholson, whose role in Easy Rider had launched him into stardom. By the time 5 Easy Pieces and Chinatown hit the screen, Nicholson wasn't just an actor. He was a household name, admired for his intensity and his wild, unpredictable energy both on-screen and off. Anjelica Huston, meanwhile, was beginning to carve her own path. As the daughter of John Huston, one of Hollywood's greatest directors, she grew up surrounded by movie legends, yet her career was anything but handed to her. She modeled, she auditioned, and she worked tirelessly to prove that she was more than her famous last name. She was striking, intelligent, and fiercely independent, qualities that instantly caught Nicholson's attention. The two met at a party in Los Angeles, a setting that seemed almost scripted. Smoky air, music spilling from the speakers, the room filled with actors, musicians, and writers who defined that era of Hollywood. Nicholson, with his trademark grin, was immediately drawn to Huston's beauty and wit. Huston later admitted that Nicholson had a magnetism unlike anyone she had ever met. He was charming, playful, and had a way of making everyone in the room feel like the most important person. Their connection was instant. For Huston, who was still finding her place in the industry, being with Nicholson meant stepping into a whirlwind of fame, excitement, and unpredictability. For Nicholson, who thrived on chaos and adventure, Huston was a grounding presence, someone elegant and intelligent enough to keep up with his world, yet compassionate enough to stand by him when others might have walked away. In those early days, their relationship was intoxicating. They were inseparable, attending premieres, award shows, and glamorous Hollywood parties together. Photographers loved them. Nicholson, the wild rebel, and Huston, the statuesque beauty with a mysterious smile. To the public, they looked like a power couple destined for Hollywood royalty. But behind the glamour, there were already cracks beginning to show. Nicholson's reputation as a womanizer wasn't just gossip. It was a reality Huston had to face from the very beginning. Even as their romance blossomed, there were whispers of his dalliances with other women, affairs that never seemed to stop. Huston, young and deeply in love, often brushed off the rumors or convinced herself she could handle it. But those early compromises planted the seeds for the heartbreak that would come later. Still, for all the challenges, there was no denying the passion between them. Huston often spoke of Nicholson's generosity, his humor, and his ability to light up a room. He took her on adventures, introduced her to the inner circles of Hollywood's elite, and showered her with affection when he was fully present. He was unpredictable, sometimes frustratingly so. But that unpredictability also made him thrilling. Friends at the time said their relationship was like a storm. Beautiful, powerful, and impossible to ignore. They fought, they made up, they laughed, and they loved fiercely. Houston later reflected that part of Nicholson's appeal was his ability to make her feel alive, even if that came with chaos. Those early years were a mix of enchantment and unease, a delicate balance between glamour and heartbreak. For Houston, it was the beginning of a love story that would define much of her adult life, one that taught her about passion, loyalty, and ultimately, survival. As the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, Anjelica Huston and Jack Nicholson had become one of Hollywood's most talked-about couples. They weren't married, but their long-term relationship defied the casual nature of Nicholson's reputation. For nearly 2 decades, Huston stood beside him, navigating a love story that was equal parts exhilarating and devastating. To understand their bond, you have to look at both the light and the shadows, the good, the bad, and the chaos that defined their time together. On the good days, life with Jack Nicholson felt like a dream. He was at the height of his career, taking home an Academy Award for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and later captivating audiences with performances in The Shining. Terms of endearment and Preezy's honor, the latter co-starring Huston herself. Being with Nicholson meant being part of the Hollywood inner circle. There were parties at his Mulholland Drive home, late nights with famous musicians, directors, and actors, and the kind of access to power and prestige that few people ever experience. Huston, who already carried her father's legacy, was elevated even further by Nicholson's orbit. But it wasn't just about the glamour. Huston often described Nicholson as charismatic and endlessly fascinating. He was funny, warm, and could be incredibly tender when he chose to be. There were nights when he would cook for her, listen intently to her worries, or surprise her with unexpected kindness. For Huston, those moments of connection were intoxicating. They reminded her why she stayed, why she loved him despite everything, and yet everything was a heavy weight. Nicholson's womanizing wasn't just a rumor whispered in Hollywood circles. It was a reality Huston faced constantly. Women adored him, and Nicholson rarely turned down the attention. Affairs, flings, and betrayals became a recurring theme of their relationship. Huston later admitted that she often felt like she was competing with the world for his affection, living in a constant state of insecurity about who he might be seeing behind her back. The emotional toll was immense. Huston loved Nicholson deeply, but she also endured a level of humiliation that chipped away at her confidence. Friends said she was often heartbroken, yet too in love to walk away. Her loyalty kept her tethered to him, even as his behavior caused her pain. She once confessed that she lived on the edge of heartbreak throughout much of their time together, never knowing when the next betrayal would strike. And then there was the chaos that seemed to follow Nicholson everywhere. He thrived on unpredictability, both in his work and in his personal life. Nights turned into mornings, parties blurred into hangovers, and the lifestyle of excess was never-ending. Drugs, alcohol, and late-night adventures were part of the scene. And while Huston was no stranger to Hollywood's darker corners, she was often left picking up the pieces after Nicholson's escapades. Still, the couple's bond was undeniable. Even when they fought, and they fought often, there was a deep pull between them. Huston later reflected that Nicholson had a way of making her feel special, even while he was breaking her heart. It was a contradiction she lived with for nearly 20 years. The intoxicating high of his love paired with the devastating low of his betrayals. Theirs wasn't a quiet love story. It was loud, messy, and filled with contradictions. Huston endured the chaos because she truly believed in the love they shared, or perhaps because she hoped he would one day change. But the chaos never stopped. In fact, it was only a matter of time before it exploded into something Huston could no longer ignore. By the mid-1980s, Anjelica Huston and Jack Nicholson's relationship had already survived more turbulence than most couples could endure. But the chaos that had once seemed thrilling began to weigh heavier on Huston. The betrayals, the constant late nights, and the whispers of other women, all of it chipped away at the foundation of their love. For years, Huston endured it in silence, choosing loyalty over self-preservation. But eventually, even her patience reached its limit. The breaking point came in the most public and painful way imaginable. In 1989, Houston learned that Nicholson had fathered a child with another woman, actress Rebecca Broussard. This wasn't just another fling or a whispered rumor of infidelity. It was undeniable proof of Nicholson's reckless behavior and disregard for the relationship he shared with Houston. For nearly 2 decades, she had stood by his side, investing her love, her time, and her loyalty. And in return, Nicholson had built a family with someone else. The revelation devastated her. Houston later admitted that she was humiliated and crushed when the news broke. It wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was the public nature of it. Hollywood was buzzing with gossip, and Houston couldn't escape the humiliation of being Nicholson's long-term partner who had been cast aside so publicly. For a woman of her stature, dignity, and strength, it was a wound that cut deep. In her memoir, Houston revealed the intensity of her emotions during that period. She described an explosive confrontation with Nicholson after she discovered the affair, one that captured years of pent-up anger and heartbreak. Nicholson, true to his nature, tried to charm and smooth things over, but this time it wasn't enough. Houston had reached her breaking point. The trust had been shattered beyond repair, and no amount of charisma could erase the pain of betrayal. Friends and colleagues who witnessed the aftermath noted how profoundly the incident affected Houston. She had invested so much of herself in Nicholson, often sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of their relationship. And yet, when the truth came out, she was left with nothing but scars. "I was heartbroken," she later confessed. "It was the end of something I had hoped would last forever." For Nicholson, the situation was complicated but hardly surprising. His reputation as a womanizer had always been part of his persona, and while he cared for Houston deeply, commitment was never his strong suit. Broussard went on to have 2 children with Nicholson, a move that solidified his betrayal in Houston's eyes. For her, it was the ultimate confirmation that no matter how deeply she loved him, he would never fully belong to her. And yet, the breaking point wasn't as clean as simply walking away. Despite the betrayal, Nicholson and Houston remained in each other's lives, bound by nearly 2 decades of history. They continued to see each other, sometimes as friends, sometimes as something more complicated. But the relationship that had once defined her youth was forever changed. Houston later reflected that Nicholson was both the love of her life and the source of her greatest heartbreak. That contradiction, the simultaneous pull of love and pain, was something she carried long after their romance ended. Even as she rebuilt her life, pursued her own career triumphs, and found love elsewhere, the shadow of Nicholson lingered. The breaking point may have ended their relationship in the traditional sense, but it didn't erase the bond they had shared. In some ways, that was the hardest part for Houston, realizing that even after the betrayal, she could never fully let go of him. Decades had passed since the turbulence of her relationship with Jack Nicholson, and Anjelica Huston had long established herself as one of Hollywood's most respected and independent actresses. With acclaimed performances in films like Prizzi's Honor, The Witches, and The Grifters, she built a career defined not by the men she loved, but by her talent, resilience, and unmistakable presence. Yet, even with the years and distance, the story of Jack Nicholson remained a chapter she could not ignore, one that shaped her both personally and professionally. At 74, Huston finally broke her silence, revealing a version of the truth that had been carefully guarded for decades. In candid interviews and public reflections, she acknowledged the man Nicholson truly was, both his brilliance and his flaws. She spoke of his charm, his intelligence, and the magnetic personality that made him irresistible. She admitted that part of what drew her in was his energy, his unpredictability, and the feeling that life with him was an adventure like no other. But she also spoke openly about the pain he caused. Huston admitted that Nicholson's infidelities, his disregard for boundaries, and his inability to commit fully to their relationship left lasting scars. She described moments of humiliation and heartbreak, times when she felt powerless to stop the pattern of betrayal that seemed woven into his very nature. Yet she framed her reflections not as anger, but as clarity, a way to reconcile the contradictions of loving someone so extraordinary yet so flawed. Huston's honesty revealed another side of Nicholson as well, one that rarely made it into public perception. She spoke of his generosity, his loyalty to friends, and the moments when he could be tender, deeply funny, and unexpectedly thoughtful. These glimpses of the man behind the legend painted a portrait that was far more complex than the caricature of a Hollywood womanizer. To Huston, Nicholson was never purely villain or hero. He was both. Simultaneously, and that duality explained much of the turbulence in their relationship. Importantly, Huston also shared what she had learned from the experience. She reflected on resilience, self-respect, and the importance of understanding that love does not always equate to happiness or permanence. She credited the relationship with teaching her about boundaries, emotional intelligence, and her own capacity for forgiveness. In a way, Nicholson became a teacher of life's most difficult lessons, even if he himself remained unchanged. By telling her story at 74, Huston reclaimed ownership of her narrative. She did not vilify Nicholson, nor did she romanticize their time together. Instead, she offered a nuanced truth, a love that was passionate, a partnership that was complicated, and a heartbreak that shaped her into the woman she became. For fans and observers, her revelations were a reminder that behind the glitz of Hollywood, real people experience love, loss, and reconciliation in all its messy forms.